This is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and I'm going to be taking a look at a game from a new chess YouTuber, Mato Jelic. And so this guy is a very strong player. In this game, we have George Z playing white and Mato Jelic playing black. And this is a pretty recent game, 2012 in Australia. So Z is going to be opening up here with D4. And Mato Jelic with C6. It looks like we're going to have a Slav Defense, but after knight C3, Queen's Gambit accepted, taking on C4. After E4, we have B5. And I believe this is called the Alekhine Variation. After A4 and knight F6 and E5 here. And so I kind of rushed through the opening there. This stuff is so complicated. I don't want to waste time talking about opening theory right now. Let's go ahead and get to the thick of the game. So one person who's playing this is a recent grandmaster from the U.S. I've been seeing quite a bit, and this line is very, very popular. It gets so crazy for both sides. It immediately creates so much imbalances in the first couple of moves. So bishop takes c4. White gets his pawn back. Black with a very dynamic position. So knight d7. See bishop e7, trying to complete his development. That is just so important. You really don't want to allow white to play moves like bishop g5 or knight g5 and knight to e4, stuff like that. So bishop e7, and so now with a5, white was threatening bishop takes and maybe knight takes b4, something like that. So a5, shoring up the weaknesses. Queen e2, probably trying to stop some exchanges with bishop a6. I believe that rook c1, trying to set up some pressure on the c-file was also possible. And so knight to b6. So after b3, we're starting to, we're approaching the middle game here. We're out of the opening. And I think after c5, black should be able to say he's got a pretty good position. Mainly because of the knight on a2. That's white's biggest problem. If he could just jam this knight in, but he doesn't have much time. And so black's knights are connected. I like what white's got going on here. Or what black. White goes back with bishop d3, so he decides he doesn't want to trade the bishop, and he maybe is trying to set up some threats here, it's diagonal. So black decides to exchange on d4. White takes, and there's not really that many good tactics for black. Maybe like knight f4, you could try it, but probably just bishop takes. Queen takes and bishop e3, and that's not going to be working too well. So instead, knight takes d4. Black can just castle, and so knight c6. This is a pretty nice move, knight c6, because the knight is very loose there, and also getting this dark square bishop should definitely improve white's position. I think it was also possible to maybe play knight to b5. Or maybe like rook to d1 and rook c1 and knight b5, something like that. But knight c6, this was pretty cool because what happened here is that after queen to e4, black is under some pressure. So very nice intermediate move, this queen to e4. Black obviously can't take on c6, he gets mated. And so to combat this threat on this diagonal, black really only has two choices. He can play g6, weakening a lot of dark squares, which is especially going to be bad after white takes the dark squared bishop. Let's say something like this, and he just snatches the bishop. And talking about some weak dark squares, this is sketchy business here for black. Long-term weaknesses. We got redundant knights fighting for the same square on d5. This is not looking very fun. So what? Mato Jelic, he just plays f5, and this is a debatable decision as well. I mean, he's striving for activity, but he is going to result with a very weak pawn here. So his position is just barely held together. The knight's defending the rook here, but he is hitting the queen. So the queen's pretty much forced back, and bishop b7. So black does have a few claims to fame here. I mean, he's got a really weak pawn on e6, so that's the basis of white's strategy. But black's trumps, he's got an awesome bishop. White's knight is completely out of the game as well. And I think black is a little bit ahead in development. Or I guess development is really about equal here. So just the knight is being out of play is giving black some comp. Bishop d5, nice move. combining defense and attack here. So knight c1 makes sense, trying to get the knight in the game. And queen b7, so another nice move. Routine moves, maybe like rook to c8, is not going to do so much because the entry points along the c-file are all covered by white's bishops. So queen to b7, very nice idea, try to establish some pressure here. So this forces white to either play f3 or f4. White plays f4, and okay, I don't see like a huge difference. Maybe f3 long term or something's going to be better because you blunt the diagonal. But f4 is just fine, a little bit more aggressive, a little looser, but a little more aggressive. So why not? Now knight to c8, a pretty interesting idea by black. Black really has just a ridiculous amount of choices here. One obvious move maybe would be knight to d7, trying to go to c5 to hit the bishop and the pawn. Another obvious move, rook to c8, not going to work. Bishop to a6. So it's, I think I like this knight c8 move because now knight to d6 or e7, really, kind of similar ideas, and maybe the knight can try to get to f5 where it would be really, really well placed. And so white's response here, Z is a strong player. He plays bishop to e3, knight d6, and bishop c5. So he's paying a lot of attention to black's moves here. We can see that. Very, very smart prophylactic play. And, well, this is a good bishop. He had the two bishops. But if the knight gets to f5, I think it would have been a really good piece. So maybe the other option would have been bishop to d4. And then if, like, knight f5, bishop b2 or something, to just, put the bishops, put these guys on some good squares. That would have been another option. What white does is a little less risky. He just eliminates black's one of his best pieces. So he just immediately goes for the trade and bishop c4. So the bishop on d5 is really the thing that's holding black's position together. If we look at this position, it's defending the weak pawn. It's hitting g2, hitting b3. This bishop is a superstar, and white goes to trade it off. So very smart. And so now black, knight e4, he sees some squares, he sees some threats, he goes for it, I like it. And so knight to d3. Should also mention rook d1 looks like a fun move, but knight c3 is going to knock that guy out. So okay, so knight to d3. Now bishop takes, pawn takes. So this is, I wasn't really so impressed with this knight to d3 move. I mean, it's kind of tough what else to do, because if he takes the bishop, now black's weakness kind of becomes a strength. It's not that strong, this pawn here, but it's not that bad either. And with this pressure, with the knight coming to c3, I'd have to give the edge to black. So in light of that, I mean, this was a really weird game. It was kind of tough to understand just because the dynamics were changing so quickly and so subtly. And so knight d4 was a very good move. And after knight d3, now black is going to pick up some good chances with knight to c5. Unfortunately, he can't play knight to c3. Well, he could, but maybe after this check, it's not going to be quite as strong. And still, I mean, he's got some pawns. This does look pretty good. Say knight takes. White is probably going to want to push this pawn very quickly. Try to get to c6, knight e5 and stuff. So knight to c5, okay. The idea is pretty simple. And after takes, it's check. So that's the idea. That it's check, and black can defend his weak pawn. And in this endgame, it's very complicated. Even though, in spite of the reduced material equality, it's very complicated due to the imbalances in pawn structure. White has got a weak pawn on f4. We can start feeling that now. If he had played f3, it would have been a little tighter. The pawn on f4 is definitely weak. White's weaknesses, pawn islands, right? Black has some weaknesses too, though, but they're tougher to attack. The pawn on e6 is pretty easy to defend, at least for now, and the pawn on a5 would be a potential weakness. Again, it's very difficult to attack. So in the game, he played g3, and this is not the most impressive move, but it's tough to find good moves for white, and white has got to be really careful. Like queen to e5. I think this looks okay on paper, but maybe if he takes, and now rook f5. And all of a sudden, this protected passed pawn is going to be a serious threat in the near future. So just an example. In the game he plays g3, he's trying to protect his pawn, but this really weakens up his king. So I think g3 is a move I would really be hesitant to play. So queen e3 maybe. Queen e3, but then he takes c4. So it's really not that easy. Could be the same thing with queen e5. He could take c4, but taking a5. And a slight edge to black here. I think it's roughly equal. So g3, queen c6, eyeing this guy. Now queen e5. And I want to say in this position e5 was possible. I want to say e5 was a possibility. So and this is a very natural move for black to play e5 here. I mean, e6 pawn was his biggest weakness. So if he can try to trade that off by playing e5, by attacking this pawn, by capitalizing on that pin there in the focal point on f2, we could see some interesting things. And so after e5, the idea is not to play rook takes and just give away a free pawn. Not the idea. More, in this position, after e5, pawn takes, rook takes e5. And, well, let's check it out. I mean, if this guy's pinned, right? So there's no check. And it looks like he's going to have to take here, probably. Something like this. And maybe after checking here, black could force a draw if he wants. But in this position, I don't know. It's a very sketchy position to play for the win because white's got the c pawn. He can jam that, and I think black should probably play for the win here. But it's gonna be dangerous. So I think maybe this was a good chance for black. I think it really makes a lot of sense to play e5 if you can do it. Instead, queen c6. Okay, this is not a bad move. I mean, we're putting pressure and defending. c6 is a great square. And also got to notice the patience, right? This protected passed pawn, there's no need to jam it right away. It's better to wait and improve your other pieces and then play with the pawns like that. So queen e5, rook f5, very natural move, and queen to e4. So queen e5, I don't know. I didn't really like it. I didn't really like queen e5. Why give a free move here to rook f5? And so now queen takes a4. So black goes out for the win. I mean, if queen takes e4, rook takes. In this position, black is definitely. I think black's got to be a little better because of the pass pawn, because of the weakness on c4. But I think it's probably a draw because it's very difficult here for white to make progress, and the same thing for black. Let's say like rook here, maybe rook c2, and maybe he can try like a well-timed b3. Certainly interesting, but anyway, I mean, it was a little more aggressive just to snatch the pawn on a4, so I like it. That's a good idea. It should be noted here, queen takes f5, and queen can capture on e8, so that's not going to work. So okay, so now rook d2, so black is up a pawn. Plays b3, starts marching. Rook d6. So we know that black's probably not going to be able to keep that extra pawn. He tries. Maybe rook here was a possibility, but I guess after rook takes, black's king is really, really weak. So it's a very dangerous position after b3, trying to march the pawns. What else can you do, though? I mean, rook d2 is a nice move because the queen is cut off. And it's cut off a lot. A lot of squares there. So this is a pretty interesting game. I mean, rook here probably just runs into rook d6 just the same, and the queen doesn't have any squares. So here after b3, now rook f6. So black is trying to hold on. f5 definitely comes to mind. Definitely. This has got to be considered. If rook takes, then rook takes e6. And this looks like a good way for white to get some counterplay. But, you got to think every trade here is going to benefit. It's going to benefit black with his connected passers. So this was an idea with f5. Instead, he played rook b6, and well, that can't be a bad move. Trying to round up these weak pawns. They're temporarily weak. And queen c6. So excellent activity by white. Black just hanging out, trying to consolidate. Now with a4, he does succeed in consolidating. However, rook a6 here was an idea. And I think a pretty good one. Maybe we see b2. Now if rook takes, queen here. Let's say rook f1. And if he goes for queen c1, maybe rook to b4. And it looks like white is going to emerge with something. Maybe an extra pawn. Maybe not. Maybe it just ends in a draw. I don't know. I just feel like rook a6 makes the most sense to me. Yeah, so that's what he played in the game. Things diverged a little bit. So we saw queen b2. Instead of playing b2 direct, black plays queen to b2. And so he's trying to activate his queen. So queen e5. Really nice prophylactic play by white. Trying to really countering, controlling the opponent's threats. And so rook takes. Doesn't want to take with the pawn and open up, all these rooks on the f file. So rook takes, and now the idea is very simple, to put the rook on b5 and try to stop this pawn. And I believe here, after rook takes e5, that black actually had a forced win. In the game he played b2, but I believe after rook to b8, there's no way to stop these pawns. Put the rook behind the pawn, right? And this looks pretty good. It really does. And there's a lot of tactics here that white's got to watch out for too. Yeah, I think this maybe rook to e1, b2, rook b1, and rook b4. This is what I'm thinking. And after c5, we could see rook f5. And now black just gets his other rook over and tries to win with rook to c1 very quickly. If rook a5, I believe he's got a3. So now just threatening a2. This is pinned. So if rook takes, simply rook takes c5. And I don't see a good way to stop rook c1 check. If rook here, maybe rook here. And, okay. Maybe the queen's not going to happen immediately in this position. The rook here doesn't work. He just takes the pawn. So maybe we just play rook takes, king takes. But king takes to keep the rook behind the pawn. But, I mean, come on. I think black is going to win this game because he can never move his rook. And what's going to happen is black's king is just going to jam up and win some pawns while white's king has to go over and deal with this mess at b2. So that's what's up. I think there was a forced win for black. Not the easiest plan to find, but it is certainly logical in this position to play rook to b8 because you just put the rook behind the pawn and you prevent rook to b5. If rook b5, you just take it and play b2 and you're going to queen. So I think this is one point. Maybe Mato Jelic was down on time here. Who knows? He played b2, and after rook b5, now the pawns that looked very scary actually are going to drop. And so he tries e5 here. And so this is cool. I mean, this is a good idea. E5, we open this up. We're trying to open this up. But after rook takes pawn takes, and now rook takes b2. In this position, it should be a draw. And so I think white obviously has got a little bit of an edge. But I believe it should be a draw. And I think the drawing method is for white to put his rook on g6 so that it's protecting this pawn and attacking this pawn. And then he's just going to be able to play with this rook wherever he wants. The rook doesn't necessarily have to be on g6. It needs to be on one of these squares. g6, g5, g4. Whatever. But the rook needs to be defending g7 against white's threat of doubling on the 7th rank. And I believe black can draw. I mean, it's a little bit tricky. It's not going to be fun. But as long as white can't jam the c-pawn, if black can just play actively and create counter threats against white's king, I think black should be able to draw this. Instead, after rook f1 check and rook c1, this is a very natural maneuver. Put the rook behind the pawn. Guard this guy. The problem is rook to b7. And now the rook's on the 7th rank. There's really just no escape because it's too late to move the rook up. It's too late to put a rook there because you just get checked and rook here. And the rooks on the 7th rank are unstoppable. Absolutely unstoppable. So after rook b7, it's the same thing if rook f7. Just check again. Rook a7. and black is just hurting for certain. Now, I mean, honestly, I want to admit I'm not 100% sure if this is a draw here, because white has all the chances. I mean, I feel like white has equal chances of winning as black has of drawing. I mean, it's not going to be easy at all after rook g6, because it's tough to play actively for black. I mean, that's the key here. He's got to generate counterplay and threats against white's king to have any chance of drawing. Otherwise, white is probably going to double up, and he's probably going to try to push his pawn, something like that. So anyway, back to the game here. After rook f1, rook c1, rook b7, I do think black is lost here. So George Z does a great job of closing it out. Very instructive technique. So he just plays rook a7, rook takes, snatches a few pawns, just takes the pawns, and now white's plan is very simple. He can either march the pawn to g6 and play rook h8 mate, or he can march his king there and rook h8 mate. So in the game, king g4. He actually marches the king all the way to g7, and, well, it's hopeless against rook h8 mate. That's what happened in the game. So, a very cool game. I mean, Mato Jelic's got I like this guy's style. You know, he's a very crazy player, very, very dynamic, very imbalanced. I like all those things. Very interesting chess, and I definitely recommend everyone to check out his YouTube chess channel, Mato Jelic. So this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and thanks for tuning in.